is, as you remember in the invitation, the divine plan and the greatness of this day. So let's see what the divine plan is and how great is this day. And we are fortunate to have our dear friend, Mr. Shahnam.May with us. And so we'll start with a prayer and then we'll continue our session. And if you allow me to share the screen for the prayer, and then we'll take it from there.
Oh, my friend and word, ponder a while, ponder a while, ponder a while. Hast thou ever heard that friend and foe should abide in one heart? Cast out then the stranger, that the friend may enter his home. Cast out then the stranger, that the friend may enter his home. That the friend may enter his home. Oh, my friend and word, ponder a while, ponder a while, ponder a while. Hast thou ever heard that friend and foe should abide in one heart? Should abide in one heart? Should abide in one heart?
Welcome again, everyone, to our next session. Without any further ado, please welcome our dear friend, Mr. Shahnam.May.
Ya Lapa, most beloved friends, dear brothers and sisters in spirit, co-workers in the establishment of a new world order, most welcome to our tonight's session. After having centered our attention the last two times on the equation of existence, life after death, the purpose in life, and the reality of the soul, In this very session today, we want to revolve our thoughts on the divine plan and how it expresses itself in history, and furthermore, on the greatness of this day and the greatness of this very dispensation. Beloved friends, in order to understand the concept of the divine plan, it is necessary, as Abdul Baha is explaining to us in some answered questions and other passages in his writings and explanations as well, that the divine plan expresses itself in cycles that stand for phases of spiritual and social evolution of mankind. Spiritual and social evolution of mankind, we are talking about the evolution of thoughts, the evolution of consciousness. And actually, basically, as we heard the last time in our session, the whole divine plan, the whole concept of religion, the whole concept of existential reality is basically the unfoldment and the development and the empowerment. We have to overemphasize this, the empowerment of consciousness. Yeah. So because in reality, the spiritual identity of man is basically the world and the sphere of his consciousness. So that's what we talked about last time. And yeah, now as Abdul Baha, His Holiness, is explaining, the divine plan is basically manifesting itself in cycles, basically in phases. And in order to retrace that concept, we have to put ourselves in the narration of the creation and the Genesis. Basically, just as an information in brackets, there are two accounts of creation in the Genesis. One is the Yahwistic account of creation. The other one is the priestly account of creation. And basically, we are now focusing on the priestly account of creation in the Genesis, which explains that the world of being basically was created in 6 days, in a process of 6 days. God basically rested on the seventh day. So basically, this story in itself is highly enigmatic, highly symbolical, highly puzzling, and full of mystical concepts, mystical secrets. So now again, we are devoting our attention to the explanations of Abdul Baha here. Basically, also His Holiness the Bab had actually explanations on this concept of the creation narrated in the Genesis, but basically now Abdul Baha is explaining to us, to make it very, very accessible for us, that the 6 days, yeah, we know that according to the Bible, 1 day of God is like 1,000 years as we count them. It's basically in the second letter of Peter, chapter 3, verse 8. And for example, Surah Sojda in Quran, like Surah number 32, verse 5, is also like hinting to the fact that 1 day of God is 1,000 years as we count them. And then we find like similar narrations like that in the Ahadith and so on. So basically, a literal interpretation of this priestly account of creation in the Genesis would say like that basically the whole creation was founded in 6,000 years. And basically Abdul Baha like obviously is making clear that this has to be meant in a symbolic way. Like obviously in the third day the sun was created according to that narration. So how did even day 1 become day 2? This kind of things. And furthermore, then that God itself is like beyond time and space, makes it very clear that there are no phases for him, that he is not bound to any specific timeline or to a process of like now 6,000 years or whatever. So basically, it gets very clear for us that this 6,000 years have a different meaning, and Abdul Baha is explaining the 6 days, the 6,000 years of development of creation, as not the material or physical development and evolution of mankind or the world, but it is basically a spiritual or civilizatorial development that Abdul Baha is hinting towards. So basically, it's a cultural progress of evolution. It's an evolution of thoughts. Yeah? Culture is like the sum of thoughts and values that are prioritized by us. So basically, this is what is like going through a process in human history. And now, interestingly, we don't want to lose ourselves now so much into details, but what is really interesting here, so this very phase of the divine plan that is like dated back to 6,000 years of time span, basically that concept is coherent with one factual aspect of the science of history, yeah, historical science. In what regard? Obviously, the history of mankind is millions of years old, but the historical science, like the science of history, traces itself back its roots to, like, is tracing the history of mankind, not mankind itself, the history of the accessible history of mankind back to actually basically 4,000 years before Christ, because that was when the civilization of the Sumerians made it happen to put language into scripture, into script, into writing. And by the Akkadian writing style, by that very language encoded into letters, we have traces from that culture, and we can like trace back history from there. So this is the oldest thing that historical science for the begin of the history of mankind in a scientific way has access to. So basically, now the interesting thing is, the Sumerian Empire was founded and established in what we call then later call in history Mesopotamia, which means the land where the two rivers flow through, and these are actually Euphrates and Tigris. And the interesting thing is that basically the story of the Bible, the other creational account, the Yahwistic creational account, the second part of the creational account, is narrating how Adam was created by God in a garden which was located between Euphrates and Tigris again. So basically, the Bible itself is locating the begin of religious history, which starts with Adam as the first prophet, basically in that same place where also historical narration starts for us in a scientific sense. So basically, now the interesting aspect here is that according to the history of the genealogy, which is the first 5 pages or something in the Bible, in the Old Testament, very, very hard and inaccessible for reading and interpreting and so on, because it's like very, yeah, it's just naming years, who was the son of whom and who lived how long. For example, that Noah lived 950 years, Methuselah over 1,500 years and something like that, Abraham 700 years. When we take all that lineages back and so on, trace them back, we get to the time when Adam approximately lived, and it was 4,000 before Christ. So basically, it is in coherence also to when the Sumerian Empire existed. So I'm mentioning all of that for one fact, for us to get an understanding that when we say that the creation of cultural civilization, when Abdul Baha is interpreting that story, is traced back to a time span of 6,000 years, and it starts 4,000 years before Christ, it is because like before that, the science of history doesn't really have anything to trace back what human civilized, like cultural issues and so on were all about and so on. There are no traces of that before that very time of the Sumerian Empire. And the interesting thing is that's why the religion conceptually, the religious narration is also starting the whole thing with the divine plan, where we say it's the begin of a phase, it's the begin of a cycle in the eternal divine plan. It traces its back at that very time when also the Sumerians showed up in history. So now, basically, now when the whole history of religion, of religious narration starts with Adam as the first human, what equals the first prophet according to the Quran. So basically, he wasn't obviously the first prophet in history of mankind. So obviously, Abdul Baha says, as long as there was creation or the concept of creation existed, there was always a nexus, an intermediary between the transcendent cause of all causes and the world of immanence. Because if there wouldn't be an intermediary, that would have meant that God's attributes wouldn't have manifested themselves fully in the world of reality, and there would be a lack of his perfection in a philosophical sense. In a more accessible sense, Abdul Baha says, God wouldn't have loved us if he would have created us and left us bereft of guidance. He wouldn't be just if he would have like judged our life after this life without having given us any guidance. So basically, there was always the love of God, and his perfection and qualities require an intermediate part between him and the world of immanence. And this is something we talked about also here and then in the very first session that we had, like when we talked about the proofs for the existence of God and the station of manifestations, yeah, and what prophethood is all about. So basically, that nexus, that intermediate connection, that bridge between the dimensions of reality, that concept of manifestation always existed, but historically, the oldest and first or primal divine source of guidance was given to the Sumerian Empire, and that's the start for that divine cycle that we call the prophetic era, the prophetic cycle, and which is also known as the Adamitic cycle, according to Baha'i terminology. The Adamitic cycle, because the founder of that cycle was Adam. So if there was really a historical Adam, is something else. The concept of an Adam, the concept of a first manifestation of that cycle is named or entitled Adam conceptually. So that very Adam, who's also like the root of his name, obviously springs forth from the concept of human being, father of humans, is like something that we relate in interpretation to his name, to this whole story and so on. So basically, he's the founder, the father of the principle and the concept of bringing forth spiritual and divine alike offspring. So basically, he's not the father of mankind in a general sense, but he's in a biological sense, but he's the father of a concept, of a process, of a progress of empowering people to become what they were meant to be. That's basically what the whole Adamitic cycle is all about. So basically, when the Adamitic cycle started and all the different manifestations appeared, they appeared in a span of 6,000 years. The seventh day, before the seventh day, the day of God's rest, came to happen. So now we want to explore like a little bit more what a seventh day is and what about these 6 days, 6,000 years of creative progress. So basically, after Adam, we obviously know that prophets like Zoroaster, Abraham, before that Moses, also Jesus and Muhammad appeared. And Muhammad is basically the seal of the prophets, the Khatamul Nabiin, the Khatamul Anbiya, the seal of the prophets, the very last prophet, because he was the one who terminated the Adamitic cycle. Means he terminated a phase of the divine plan. And that divine plan which started out now basically with Adam as the first universal educator of mankind, of a specific representative part of mankind, like the Sumerians. In that regard, that progressive cycle of guidance for mankind, that creative action of God for cultural and civilizatorical development came to a close with Muhammad. That means that Muhammad basically was the last prophet to seal that specific phase of the divine plan. And what it means, we will get to in a second. So in that 6 days of creation, which equals 6,000 years, basically what happened? What kind of creation took place? Basically, why was God resting, according to the Bible, at the seventh day? What does that mean? Yeah. So basically, Abdul Baha is explaining now that the goal of God, in that very phase of the divine plan, his goal, the end game of God's plan, was unity of mankind. So that unity of mankind was actually what every prophet in the past established. But the mankind, or the unity of the world, was always according to what for the people was accessible as the concept of the world. In brackets, the world isn't just a geopolitical term that we use today. In the past, it was when Plato was actually founding that word in philosophy, it meant actually more your environment, your living reality. So basically that concept of the world got broader by time. So when it started with Adam, until the narration of Moses in the Bible is explaining prophetic action as something like family affair and family business, basically. In the whole story of Adam, we hear like basically, we don't hear that Adam like had a message for mankind. We just hear like that one brother killed the other, and was like about unity in family. We also in the story of Abraham, where he was like, because of the dispute of his two wives, what son will be the successor, he had to send one wife away and so on. It was like, again, the whole horizon of thinking in the story of the Bible was basically about family. In the story of Joseph, the same, that the brothers were jealous about Joseph, and then it's the end is the reconciliation of the brothers and Jacob with Joseph. You see, all these stories are obviously symbolic, but what they give us is that the spirit of that time, the zeitgeist of that time, was basically unity in larger family groups. Yeah. So sociologically speaking, that was the world for the people. And when then Moses comes, the whole narration of the Bible changes. Also in the Quran, suddenly Moses is not about family business anymore. Moses deals with a tribe, the 12 tribes of Jacob becoming one common people of Israel, the chosen people of Israel. Now becomes a term. And now the interesting thing is that basically Moses isn't even in the narration of the Quran or the Bible trying to convince Pharaoh, but he says like, this is like our truth, our God, and now let us just go to the promised land of ours. Yeah. So you see, it's not something that is like interculturally connected. It is something, a truth, a concept, a community building process for the world of the people of Israel. That's unity in that concept of people of Israel. Now we get to His Holiness Christ. And Christ is then, until then, the greatest revolutionary thinker of history. Because Christ is opening up religion and faith for people to attend by condition of spirit, by their attitude. He clearly says, for example, on the Sermon from the Mountain, where he says like, when the Pharisees come and they think like they're elite Jews and so on because they can trace their descendancy back to Abraham, Jesus says very clearly, who told you, generation of vipers, you children of vipers, of snakes, that you can flee from hellfire? If God wants, He calls that stones children of Abraham, and they will be children of Abraham. Offspring of Abraham means like, now faith is not bloodline anymore. Faith is not genealogically inherited. Faith is an attitude. So Christ makes the religion open for the people from the Roman Empire who were the suppressors and oppressors of the Jewish people. He opens it for the Samaritans and all like different people who were like not part of that close people of Israel clique. Yeah. So now religion becomes unity in faith. It becomes a condition. And now after Christ, Muhammad appears, His Holiness the Prophet Muhammad, who actually unifies all the Arabic people in one Arabic nation. The peninsula of Arabia, divided in different clans, tribes, people, is now becoming one nation. And it's also like Muhammad is also the first person in history releasing something like a constitution. So you see, the interesting thing here is now there is a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad narrated by him, which says that basically love for your country is part of the Shariatullah, means loving your nation is part of the Shariatullah, is your duty as a believer. And now in that regard and in that logic and in that evolution of thoughts, His Holiness Baha'u'llah then, who is the harbinger of the seventh day of that creational story in the Bible, when God rested because his aim, his goal, his purpose was fulfilled and completed. In that logic, His Holiness Baha'u'llah reveals, you shall not pride yourself in loving your country, but shall pride yourself in loving all mankind. The world is but one country and all people are its citizens. So you see, it's that evolution of thinking that reaches with Baha'u'llah its absolute culminative peak. And this is where the divine plan hits its heyday. So basically, Baha'u'llah is ushering us into, or already His Holiness the Bab basically, is ushering us into a new age, a new era of thinking, a new cycle of the divine plan. So the Adamic cycle, which started with Adam in the Sumerian Empire, and then was consecutively carried forth by Moses and Jesus and so on, and was terminated by His Holiness Muhammad, now was opened into, was now ushered into a new phase of divine plan, a new cycle, which we call the cycle of fulfillment as one of its titles, because the past cycle was the prophetic cycle or the Adamic cycle, and this cycle is the cycle of fulfillment, and we get to the other title then in very soon in our deepening. So basically, now what we have to understand is when we say God rested, it means actually that the plan of God hit its absolute completion. Means with the coming of Baha'u'llah, which is like 6,000, if Adam lived according to the Bible 4,000 before Christ, 6,000 years later, or if you want to say so, like basically 6,000 years in addition to that, open up the seventh century, or like you want the seventh era, which is starting like basically 6,000 years later, 1844, with the declaration of His Holiness the Bab. Just in brackets for the people for whom that is very interesting. If you trace back the genealogy of the Bible back to Adam, you see that between Adam and Abraham, if you calculate all the numbers, who was the father of whom and so on, 2,556 years between Adam and Abraham, and between Abraham and Christ, 2,600 years. So it equals 4,156 years before Christ, and 6 days, which equals 6,000 years. In addition to that, 4,156 before Christ, plus 6,000 years of divine plan, you get to the exact year of the declaration of the Bible, which is 1844. So basically, the seventh day is for us, as Abdul Baha says, independent of the names and dates and everything, independent of the dates and the calculation. It is an era. It is an era that is ushered in. This era is also like not just called the seventh day, but also the St. John's Revelation is speaking about the 1,000 years kingdom of God, the 1,000 years ministry, the 1,000 years dynasty, basically, that is going to come down on earth on the final day, on the promised day. So basically, the seventh day of the narration of creation in the Bible is nothing else than the promised day, the day that all the prophets of the past foretold mankind. In one regard, now basically, all of the past prophets, they gave hints towards the seventh day by calling it very, very clearly and unequivocally the day of God. Yeah, so it's the era of God, the day of God. Yeah, the day of the Lord is the seventh day, the day where God rested, the day of God. Yeah, so this was the promised day on Yomul Mu'ud in all the past writings. So basically, when Christ speaks about the judgment day, the end of times, it is basically a hint towards that very seventh day. Because of why? Because after the seventh day, there is no eighth day. There is no ninth day. There is no other day after the seventh day. That seventh day is an eternal day according to the Bible. So basically, all the other days, they had a dialectic of day and night. The next day came. This is what the Bible says. It's like it narrates what happened at the first day, and then night came, and the second day dawned, and that was a day again before then the creation happened. On that day, night came again, and then the third day dawned, and so on. So on the seventh day, the Bible doesn't say that there will be another day or there will be night or something. The seventh day is just day for eternity. Is the eternal day of God. So this is why the Bible is like speaking about about judgment day in that regard also as basically the end of times, the last day. Yeah. So basically, Quran is doing the same. It's speaking about judgment day and the day of resurrection and all of that, and is saying that that day of judgment is basically the day when God appears on earth. So basically, Quran says in the 13th surah, verse 2, be assured of a day, certain of a day where you will see God from countenance to countenance. Yeah. So basically, there is another verse in the Quran, the second surah in the Quran, verse 210, which says that you shall be assured of a day when God on the clouds descends on earth, and with him manifold angels and like a concourse of angels and chosen ones. So basically, also Quran is pointing towards that with many verses, but another one that basically is 39 verse 69, which says that the light of God's countenance will embrace the whole earth. So the Bible is like saying that at judgment day, the glory of the Father will appear. Obviously, the St. John's Revelation is full of hints like that, but there's like many other passages in the Bible as well. For example, in John, when Christ is saying in John 16, verse 12 and 13, manifold truths I can like basically reveal to you, but you are not capable of understanding them. But when the Spirit of truth appears, he will guide you in all truth that I didn't mention. So the seventh day, the day of God, is also the day of the disclosure of truth. Yeah. So basically, there is another verse which says like in John, in the Gospel of John, that basically the Lord of that world will appear. So such superlative attributes towards a promised figure coming in future who's God-like, because he's the Father, he is the glory of the Father, he is the Lord of creation, he is like Alpha and Omega, what basically also St. John's Revelation is saying about the return of Christ. All that should happen. To that promised one, for example, Christ has referred as the Prince of the world, as the Comforter who will reprove the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment, and as a Spirit of truth who will guide you into all truth, who shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall hear, that he shall speak, as the Lord of the vineyard, the Son of Man, who shall come in the glory of the Father. And he says like that, he is the countenance of God. He is in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He is it, like the creator of all holy angels, and all nations will gather before his throne. And he's the glory of God, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. And yeah, so the one through whom the new Jerusalem will come down on earth and the kingdom of God will be established. So this kind of narrations we find in the Bible, exemplary. I just mentioned some. For example, Bhagavad Gita is hinting towards that by Krishna by saying like the promised figure on that very promised day will be the Kalki avatar, and the Vishnu Yasha means basically he's the most great avatar of the divine, and he is the overall Godhead of all divinity in the form of Vishnu Yasha who will appear. And Buddha is referring to him as the fifth Buddha, or also by saying Amit Apha will appear. Amit Apha, which is actually the light of all lights, yeah, the creator of light, yeah. So basically, the Zoroastrian narration is like hinting towards Shah Bahram, means like, which is basically the king of this world, and also like hinting towards the image of Ahura Mazda, like the god of the Zoroastrian religion himself shall appear in the garment of that greatest king, Shah Bahram on earth, and conquer darkness forever and bring the era of light. So you see, this kind of narrations basically also the Zoroastrian religion is talking about the process of 6,000 years of darkness before light comes. It is very, very, very interconnected to the story of creation that we know from the Torah, which is confirmed in the New Testament and also hinted towards also in the Quran. So now, what is like this basically this concept of prophetic cycle all about? Basically, all prophets of the past, manifestations of the past, were called prophets by that very term because of the functionality of the term. The term prophet, which comes from the Hebrew nevin or from the Arabic nabi, means basically someone who hears something before others hear it, or someone who sees things before others see it. So basically, they're foreshadowing something to happen. They're announcers. They're announcers of something, yeah? And that is the very most glad tiding that they're announcing. So the manifestations of God are basically prophets, and Muhammad is the last prophet because they were having one functionality, one task in common, and that was announcing the day of the promised one. That very thing that we started our discussion with by saying the seventh day. So basically, all the prophets of the past in their functionality were co-equal in one task, which was paving the path for Baha'u'llah, preparing the path of Baha'u'llah and the Bab, like opening up that very era which should be ushered in, mankind should be ushered in by the declaration of the Bab and then the revelation of Baha'u'llah. So basically, all the past prophets called themselves such because they were teaching the faith of Baha'u'llah before Baha'u'llah appeared. So that meant prophecy in that regard. They were like witnesses, testimonies, figures who testify to the greatness of Baha'u'llah that was yet to come in future. So basically, in that regard, Muhammad was the seal of the prophets because he was the last one foreshadowing or giving us humanity spoilers about the coming of the promised one, because basically he wanted to say the one after me is the very promised one. There will be no other intermediary between me and the promised one. That's hence I am Khatamul Anbiya, like the last of the prophets, because after me the very promised one will come. And that very promised one, as I just said very emphatically, is not a prophetic figure. He is the one who is meant to fulfill everything. And that's why Baha'u'llah and the Bab never use the term messenger of God or prophet of God, Nabi or Rasul, which is Islamic theology for themselves. But like basically they are fulfilling what was promised in the past. And the interesting thing is that with them, not just another cycle is open for mankind. It is the day of God, the eternal day of God that we're talking about. Now, just to understand the greatness of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah before we go deeper into that, His Holiness the Bab, next to everything we just mentioned from the Quran, who's speaking about the coming of God, the Bible, coming of God, and also like we mentioned from Krishna, from Buddha, and from Zoroaster, that they say that God-like reality will appear on earth. His Holiness the Bab is saying this, The Bab says a lot of superlatives about Manyo Solola, like the one who will come after him, which is Baha'u'llah. But one of the very, very powerful statements of his is this. Like, let me give you two examples. He says, for example, that all the prophets of the past, from Adam to Muhammad, were like a ring to his own finger, because basically the Bab claims to be the king of all messengers. The Sultan Rasuli, Sultan Anbiya, the king of all prophets and all messengers. So basically, as the ring is the sign for the legitimate power and rulership of a king, all prophets of the past are a ring to the finger of His Holiness the Bab. But then the Bab goes on and says, I myself am just a ring on the hand of who will come after me. So it says all prophets, Adam to Muhammad, are a ring to his hand, on his finger, but he himself is a ring on the finger of Baha'u'llah. So another very, very powerful statement of His Holiness the Bab is saying that all the prophets of the past, now I really hope all of us transform into a living ear, because this is going to be very important for us. Yeah. So basically the Bab says all prophets of the past were sent down onto mankind by the command of God, by Amrullah, the command of God. Yeah. So he says all prophets were sent upon mankind by Amrullah, but the one who comes after me is himself Amrullah. Again, he says all prophets were sent to mankind by Amrullah, the command of God, but the one who comes after me, he himself is Amrullah, is the command of God, is the creator and the source of all messengers and all prophethood. So now, hearing all of that, it's forcing us to question our understanding of God, because like when we hear all of that, there really is clearly saying that the promised one is God, that Baha'u'llah is the appearance of God on earth. So that forces us to question our understanding of divinity, of God, manifestation, and all of that. So basically Abdul Baha explains it like this. He says, and this is also already in the writings of the Bab, in the Bayan full. Yeah. Basically, His Holiness Abdul Baha, the Master, is explaining that when we know God by the sum of attributes and qualities. So all we know about God are the divine attributes and qualities and names. And Abdul Baha is like, I'm making it very short, the whole philosophical explanation here and elaboration is like masterfully done by the Master. But basically, for the sake of our deepening tonight, to make it a little bit more compromised, he says like all the names and attributes cannot really be the essence of God himself, because the attributes and names need an instance a priori to be projected on in order to have meaning, because we don't know what greatness is if we do not project it on the universe, or we do not project it, for example, on a mountain or whatever. We do not know what beauty is if we do not project it to a flower, or like, for example, to some other aesthetic thing. So basically, everything, like every quality, needs a seed of possibility and manifestation of expression in order to find as such meaning. So if that's the case, then God cannot be in a most literal sense his own attributes, because the attributes are dependent on a source a priori. And if that's the case, God cannot be the attributes in the most literal sense, because they're depending on his related reality. So when we speak about the attributes and also the name God, Baha'u'llah says like Allah himself is in the end nothing more than a name that is signifying the sum of qualities that we are projecting on a divine reality. All that names, they revolve around, like they revolve in the reality of the kingdom of names and attributes, the Malakuta Asma. And that Malakuta Asma is like moved, or is like manifesting itself by the operational will, agency of an instance, which is the expression of the names and attributes, which we call the primal will, the Mashiatul Avaliya. So basically, the Mashiatul Avaliya, like the primal will, is basically the expression of the divine will as an own independent entity in the ontological level of reality. So basically, the attributes and names are an expression of that very primal will, and that primal will basically is one absolute instance that is connecting the dimensions of the transcendent absolute essence of God and the world of immanence. So that very primal will, as we already talked like at 2 sessions before, has basically two natures. Has a nature of divinity because it is partly part from that infinite reality, and is in that capacity for us humans without any spiritual tarof, is for us God. But then it has also a level of servitude, which Shorefeni calls like that, servitude, which is like its reality, how it is manifesting itself in the world of conditions and immanence. So basically, that's the whole idea of the terminology of primal point in the writings of the Bab. The primal point in Nukhta Ula means the primal point has two dimensions. Yeah, has the dimension of that X layer in the coordination system and the Y layer. It is both simultaneously. It is in regard of us. It is God in regard of its own ontological comparison to the transcendent cause of all causes. The Sat Ghaibi Mani La Yudrak, it is itself something that was caused, although not by the causality of cause and action as we know it in the world of cause and effect as we know it in the world of conditions. So basically, that very primal will, that primal point, it also goes back to a theological concept of the Bible. At the beginning of John's Gospel, it says like, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and a few verses later says the Word became flesh. So the terminology for word in the original form of the Bible, the Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek version of the Bible that we have, the Aramaic words of Christ were never written down or canonized. Obviously, so the oldest Bible or the primal Bible that we have is the Greek one. So it says like, for the terminology word, it says like logos. Logos means first reason, first mind, first will, or first word. Yeah. So it is something like a reality that we say, like it says, like the Bible says, if there is a beginning, it is with logos. It is not with God. It says at the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God and the Word was God. So a timeline where we said something like a beginning only exists for the world of conditions, our material universe, our phenomenological world anyways. For the world of spiritual reality, there is no beginning at any capacity, as there is no time and space. So if we are talking about the beginning, it is from human perspective. And if we are talking about human perspective, that beginning is not God, it's the Logos. And the Logos, the primal will, was with God, means beyond that and beyond any time capacity, beyond a beginning or end or anything, there is a cause for the Logos, which is God, the transcendent absolute essence. But in regard of us, the next verse then says, the Word was God. So for us humans, the creative power of the universe is the primal will, is not this Sata Rebe Mani La Yudrak. So basically not the transcendent essence. So again, at the beginning, I say like instead of word, which is the biblical word or its original logos, I use Baha'u'llah's term, primal will. In the beginning was the primal will. The primal will was with God, means there was a cause beyond that. But then the primal will was God and became flesh. Became flesh is the level of servitude of the primal will, and the primal will on its own level of reality and the inherent reality is divine, is for us God himself, yeah? Is God. Because God has two definitional approaches. First of all, God means the possessor of all perfect qualities. So the world of names and qualities is governed by that force, which is the primal will. And second, God is the creator of all things. So creator is itself, again, just the name. And we said the transcendent essence can't be his names. He's beyond that. He's the cause of the names. So creator himself is a name, and basically also the creative action took place by the world of names and attributes, as we heard 2 weeks ago when I explained that. So basically the creator of the universe by the kingdom of names and attributes is the primal will, the Mashata Avalier. Now look back into the obligatory prayer, the Namaz Kabir, where now paraphrase, where it says basically that all things testify and the tongue of grandeur that thou art God, there's no God besides you, and the one whom you revealed is that hidden emblem, that hidden image, that the mystical image through whom the letters B and E were connected. So we do not say in the obligatory prayer, daily we are reciting that. We are not saying you are God and you created by B and E. We say that you are God, like you are beyond everything. Like also, there's no ontological attachment to him in any capacity. But that reality that he revealed, whom he revealed by through his power and bidding, B and E, the Kun Fayakun thing came to happen. Like the creation was put into reality. So, through whom the letters B and E are connected, basically friends. I hope we are aware of that. We are testifying in the obligatory prayer daily that Baha'u'llah is for us God, in the sense of he is the appearance of the divine reality of the primal will. He is the divine reality of the Mashiyata Awaliyah, the divine reality of the Logos. So now, question comes up. But why do we say all manifestations of God, and this is a pillar of Baha'i theology, why do we say all of them are the same? All manifestations are one, but then we say that Baha'u'llah is like the divine reality of the primal will, and he's so much greater than all the prophets of the past. Basically, also in brackets, it's not just what I'm just saying right now. This is also, we heard like prophecies and statements from the past religions that are giving the promised one is superlative different station and level of reality than all the other prophets. So how is that in coherence with the Baha'i teaching of the unity of manifestations? So basically, to understand that, again, a flashback to the deepening we had 4 weeks ago. Basically, the divine reality, the divine everything that is conceptually related to the divine reality is free from time and space. If that's the case, there are no numbers anyways for the divine reality. He's not one, he's not 100. He's the creator or the cause of numbers, the cause of a reality where numbers make sense. And if that's the case, he himself is not bound to that. He's not one, he's not 100. He's an absolute reality that we as human beings say, Tawhidullah, unity of God, to confess. In our world of plurality, where plurality means relativity, we confess he's absolute by saying he's singular. Yeah, he's unique in that sense, one. But in the divine reality, there are no numbers. So basically, the Mashiyata Awaliyah, the primal will, the Logos, is not different ones to say who of them is greater than the other. If that nexus in all the manifestations is the same, is one absolute reality, obviously Christ, Muhammad, and Baha'u'llah are partakers and shareholders of the same station. So basically, they are all one absolute reality. In the divine realm, where there's no time and space and everything is like in their regard an absolute reality, all of them are the one Mashiyata Awaliyah, are the one Logos, the one primal point, yeah? But in regard of our historical view on reality, which is like because we're living in a reality of time and space, we are living in a reality where there is a linear pile of time, where is a linear direction of time, obviously there's alteration and obviously there's plurality, and obviously in that regard things are also like appearing in different appearances and in different forms of expression, or expressing themselves in different forms of reality. So basically, in this historical world, the manifestations of God until Baha'u'llah, this is now very important, until Baha'u'llah, historically, all prophets revealed themselves on the level of the servitude of Mashiyata Awaliyah, the level of servitude of the primal will, and kept their divine reality of the primal will hidden. It was never separated from them. That's why Christ also in John chapter 1, verse 19 or 20, it is approximately, where it says like the Father is in the Son and the Son is in the Father. But whenever he speaks about his mission to the people, he introduces himself as the Son and says the Father is not from this realm. So basically speaking of God in a third person pronoun, yeah? So he is God. He doesn't say I am God. He says like it is from a different realm. So the same with Muhammad. He says he's the messenger of God, but Allah, like the divine reality, is not from this reality and will come on Judgment Day. And he is also confessing to God in a third person. Hova Allah, he is God, yeah? So now, in that regard, all the messengers of God always are the same. Basically, the burning bush, which was the voice of God, was Moses himself. There is no burning bush historically, obviously. It is an expression of a spiritual phenomena, which is the inherent reality of Moses. The inner reality, the true reality of Moses that is not from, has not a civil biography, that is the same as in Baha'u'llah, Muhammad and Jesus. That is the reality of the Father of God, of the Logos. But Moses says that this is beyond me. He's like separating that in his mission as a prophet from himself, and is speaking of himself to mankind as the messenger of God, and is again saying that that divine reality comes in future, the Lord of the hosts and so on, the creator of all the worlds. So basically, now Baha'u'llah is the same as all the prophets of the past. That's why he's the return of Christ. He's the return of Muhammad. He's the return of Moses. He's the return of the Bab. But he's the first manifestation, actually we have to say in brackets, with the Bab, who now reveals himself on the level of divinity of the primal will. He is the first prophet, or the first manifestation of God, who's not speaking as a prophet anymore, saying like he gets revelation from God for mankind. That whole tone and the stylistic culture of revelation changed. Bear with me, friends. This is very important for our Baha'i understanding. He doesn't say, I am a messenger receiving revelation for you, but he says he is the born, the well, the dwell, the source of revelation himself. So basically, now that reminds us of one hadith of in Islam, which is also a very important aspect in the writings of Sheikh Ahmad Asai. Sheikh Ahmad Asai said like this is from Islamic narration, but he said like that there is a word that the promised one will utter, and all the people in the world, they will have not the capacity to hear it, to bear it, to grasp it, and they will just take flight. They will just flee from the countenance of the promised one, and they will shaken, and their faith will die, and they will crumble and everything. And Baha'u'llah says like this word that the promised one was apparently going to say is that Hova, like he is God, changed into I am God. The he became I. What does that mean consequently for mankind? It means the relationship between God and mankind became more personal. It is not through third person anymore. It is directly straightforward from the source itself. And that is, friends, basically, next to all prophecies that you find in the holy writings of the past about the greatness of this day, this is actually the underlining feature why this day and dispensation and this cause of God, this religion, is the greatest in the history of mankind and the history of the universe. This concept that the connection of God and mankind became a very direct one. And in the words and terminology of the Quran, we reached Liqa'ullah, we reached the meeting with God, the countenance of God. Yeah, so biblically saying the Father appeared. So now, having said all of that, and we understood that with Baha'u'llah the divine reality appeared, that the divine station of the primal will revealed itself, and that God basically came on earth. Now we want to take a look into another thing of that creational story of the Bible. It basically said that every day was then turned night before the next day dawned. Yeah? That happens, this dialectic of day and night, evening, dawn time, comes in every day, on every day repetitively, until the seventh day, where then the day is eternal. That's the eternal day of God. So what does that mean? All the other days were day, and then came night, and then comes the next day. So basically the dialectic of day and night is, according to Abdul Baha, the day of every, like the daytime of every day in that process of creation is when the religion of God of that very time, like Jesus dispensation or the ministry of Moses, of Muhammad, was when the religion was giving guidance to mankind. But then the nighttime was, the evening, when the religion was separated so much into different sects, branches, schools of thinking and so on, that the faith itself lost its aura, lost its power, lost its energy. Obviously, the separation of the religion in the time of Muhammad, for example, came already at the time of the ascension of the Prophet. But then it starts to have to drain the energy of religion, and then due time and decades, centuries and so on, the religion is lifeless anymore. This was when the religion, it hit its absolute dark time, its nighttime. Means it's the absence of divine guidance, the absence of the light of God. A new day came and resurrected the truth of the past day. So this happens until the seventh day, and then there's no night anymore. So Baha'u'llah, by very clear determination of Revelation tells us that this is the day that shall not be followed by night. The autumn that and summer that do not know any the spring and the summertime that do not know any autumn and winter fall. So basically it's the time where the darkness is banished. The forces of night are banished. And why is that? Why is that? It's not just because we like just claim that to be. It is because the Baha'i faith has the most powerful force in the whole universe. The pivot of the unity of mankind, which is the covenant, the Ahd Misach. The covenant is basically the guarantee in Baha'u'llah's faith, how his faith should be led, administratively governed, and guided until the next manifestation comes. Means in the Baha'i faith, it is impossible to find breaches, sects, rifts, branches that claim to be the Baha'i faith on the same legitimate basis as all the other branches then as well. So this is impossible. There is no thing that can cause a breach in the Baha'i faith due to the fact that the Baha'i faith has the covenant, which was revealed by Baha'u'llah's Kitab Ahdi, and then again continue it and also confirmed in essence by Abdul Baha's will and testament, and then also like with all the guidance of Shor Effendi, and then establishment of the universal laws of justice. So basically, this is in the most literal sense the day that will never be followed by night. So now in that regard, we are talking about a new cycle. We talked about cycles at the beginning. The Adamatic cycle was something like a trial phase for mankind to get used to higher levels of unity and spiritual evolution. Now, in this very era where we speak about the cycle of fulfillment, everything that was promised and narrated for this age and announced is going to happen, is going to be fulfilled. And this is why the covenant is so crucial for this era, because when we speak about unity of mankind, it would be impossible without the unity of conviction, which stems forth from the concept of a covenant. And also, when we say this is the day of fulfillment, we mean basically that it's the day of maturation of mankind. And the maturity of mankind expresses itself in two ways. First of all, in a social maturity, which is the unity of mankind, realizing that we are all sharing one earth as our habitation. And the second thing is to be now so mature in order to be able to work with the social concept of unity. So basically, wherever we see disunity in society and so on, this is lack of maturity. It's a lack of intellectual or spiritual maturity in regard of society. So basically now we are on the threshold to that maturity, for which a unity of mankind is a fruit, is an expression of that. And the maturity of mankind in this age shows itself also in the teachings of Baha'u'llah in the regard of that we have no clergy, that everybody is responsible for his own spiritual growth. This is a sign of maturity. Yeah, next to the concept of unity, this is an aspect. And the other aspect is that we have institutions that consult, and we have no power concentrated in the hands of an individual. Power was taken away from kings and clergymen by Baha'u'llah, as he says very clearly when he's in Edirne and later in Akka, and was giving to the masses of the people, like means to the institutions, who by the election of the common Baha'is, and then by the act of consultation are coming to decisions and are making decisions for the progress of society. Yeah. So basically, all of that is a sign of maturity. Consultation couldn't have been a pillar of theology in the past religions because there was not a universal empowerment bestowed upon mankind yet. So it was a time of adolescence and getting closer to that level of maturity. So all the teachings of Baha'u'llah are a sign for us really hitting maturity, and which is again a sign for the greatness of this dispensation. But now another thing that is very important here is also that we seldom really put our focus on. What is actually very interesting is when Shor Effendi says the most significant aspect of the Baha'i faith is basically the concept of twin manifestations. Yeah? The twin manifestationhood is actually the most significant feature of the Baha'i faith. So what does that mean? Yeah? So basically everything in the Baha'i faith is basically doubled in contrast to the past. For example, the dispensation of Christ, this is a sign for the greatness of this day. Dispensation of Christ was 3 years, the dispensation of the Bab 6 or like basically 7 years. The dispensation of the Prophet Muhammad after he revealed his first parts of the Quran, and then 3 years of silence of revelation. Then his dispensation again took 20 years. The dispensation of Baha'u'llah takes 40 years of consecutive revelation. So in the past religions, there was like something like, even it was man-made, there was one institution, central institution like the Caliphate or the church or something like that. In the Baha'i faith, we have twin institutions in the universal laws of justice, which are both of them divinely ordained, also in contrast to the past. Universal laws of justice and guardianship, which Abdul Baha mentions in the same breath in the Will and Testament. So, for example, always the number of the help of God, the number of Nusratullah, the help of God, the victory of God, was always 12. The 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 apostles, the 12 imams of Shia Islam. Now, the Bible says in St. John's Revelation that when the Lord of glory appears, around him will be 24 elders. Yeah, Abdul Baha also mentioned who are these 24. But what is more important here, because we had like over 20,000 just martyrs in the faith of God, just 50 hands of the cause and so on. So obviously, it is not just up to that number. It's an interesting thing, that number thing. But what is important is the concept. The concept is that something that was 12 is now, in regard of the promised one, mentioned to have been doubled. It's a sign for the greatness of this dispensation. For example, we have not just sometimes people ask us, what is a Baha'i holy book, like Islam as Quran or the New Testament and so on in Christianity. Yeah, and then we tend to say, masalan, we do not have a holy book, we have a holy library in reality, because Baha'u'llah revealed 20,000 of works. But amongst the 20,000 pieces of writing, 2 works are significantly important in Persian and Arabic. It's like Kitab Iran and the Kitab Ahdas. So basically the Bab revealed the Kitab Bayan, but twice, a Kitab Bayan Farsi, Kitab Bayan Arabi. Yeah? So you see, even like this concept doubled, and it goes further than that. The language of revelation was Sanskrit, Aramaic, Hebrew or Arabic, but in this dispensation, Baha'u'llah and the Bab revealed in 2 languages, Persian and Arabic. This is again on calculation, on divine systematization. This is a sign for the wise, for the mystics. It's that again, the vehicle of divine transmission of revelation doubled. Yeah, and also with Abdul Baha comes a little bit of Turkish in addition to that, and with Shohr Effendi, obviously the language of explanation of divine truths is also like English. But I mean, like, basically, we see again something that was in a form and shape got greater, bigger, more in this dispensation. And also the same thing with the example of the faith, or in regard of successorship, which was never really established very firmly and clearly in the past revelations. But when that role was given to Peter or Ali, it's basically Shohr Effendi, and greater than him, Abdul Baha. You see, so basically everything is now doubled, is now in a greater magnitude revealed. And the same goes and applies now to, for example, the station of human beings. So basically, Baha'u'llah in the Kitab Ahdi is saying, great is the station of man. And then again, he repeats that. And this is so important to understand why is Baha'u'llah repeating that phrase. Great is the station of man. And then he explains when he's like living an ethical life and so on, and mentioning some virtues and so on. So, but why is that like that Baha'u'llah reveals it twice? Because basically, it's the same with the tablet of the Arzabah when he speaks about Abdul Baha. He says like, blessed, twice, like he says like, blessed the chest that has love for you, harbors love for you. Blessed, twice blessed, the hand that writes down your words, the eyes that read your words and so on. You see that? Basically says also what was sacred in the past is also doubled in its magnitude, in its intensity. So especially about the level of the human reality, this is actually the gist of everything that we were saying today. When we say that this day is the greatest of all days, that this day is the greatest dispensation, it is not of Baha'u'llah in order to glorify himself, because even if you say Baha'u'llah is the greatest revelator, even if you say Baha'u'llah is God, and we should not tout off so much with that, then this is still not telling us who Baha'u'llah is, because the word God needs a mind that has a prior understanding of that word God before he expresses it with his tongue. So basically, all we say is never ever going beyond the capacity of our imagination or the level and limitations of language. So Baha'u'llah is the creator of grammar, syntax, language, a reality in which we use language and interaction with words. So basically, he's not bound to any word and any title. So even saying he's God is still not telling us who he is. So why is he then saying that he's God? It is not to glorify himself, but to express to us, friends, this is the plot twist of this meeting tonight, that we actually like really have to be attentive towards. It is of Baha'u'llah to glorify the station of the human reality. It is not to glorify his station, but the station of mankind. Why and how? Basically, Baha'u'llah is like, to understand this, we have to like basically remind ourselves of the story of Adam and Eve. This is the Yahwistic story of creation, the second one. I said like the Bible has two stories of Genesis, of creation. And the other one says like that Adam and Eve were basically in paradise. And because of the fall to sin, they were banished from that garden, which was between Euphrates and Tigris, according to the Bible. And they were there in the presence of God. And then they're shut out of the presence of God. They're banished. And then like guardian angels, cherubim, are standing in front of the gates of the paradise so that no human being can ever enter paradise anymore. So what is paradise according to the Bible? Next to it being a location between Euphrates and Tigris, it is basically a condition of being in the presence of God. So now, when Baha'u'llah is revealing himself in the garden Rezwan, why didn't he do that on his house? It has a historical reason and so on and so on, but the reality is the metaphysical concept behind that. It had to happen in a garden Najibiyah, which was then called Rezwan, which means paradise, and Eden means also beyond the horizon, basically means where afterlife starts, like paradise. So because Baha'u'llah is re-inscenating a scenario from the past scriptures, he's revisiting the story of Adam and Eve, where mankind was shut out of the presence of God and lost access to paradise, by saying that with his declaration in the garden Rezwan, he opened the gates to paradise for mankind yet again. The paradise that we were bereft of, Baha'u'llah opened the gates with this declaration in April 1863, yet again for mankind to attain the presence of God. Now this concept, paradise equals presence of God, because with Baha'u'llah God appeared on earth, he doesn't say just the garden Najibiyah is Rezwan. He also later says in Akka, there was another garden, Rezwan and Akka. But it is because of what? It's not just the garden, it's just Rezwan or not. Basically the whole earth, this is Baha'u'llah's explanation about the garden Rezwan happenings, events, which he reveals in the 15th, like there's a tablet, number 15 in Gleanings that Shuri Effendi is compiling there. There he says basically the whole world became Rezwan. Rezwan is a condition that he wants to turn and transform the world to. So basically the world that he found was the world Siyah Chal, was a dark pit, was a black hole of ignorance, black hole of superstition. That's why Baha'u'llah's Isara Amr Khafif, like means his hidden revelation starts in the Siyah Chal, but his official declaration takes place in the garden Rezwan, because the dark pit, black pit, the Siyah Chal is basically what the world was when colonialism, imperialism reached their absolute culminative peak in the world. There was so much disestrangement, people without orientation, superstition on its absolute peak and so on. And this was like the prison of thinking and consciousness that Baha'u'llah found mankind in. And Rezwan, where he reveals the station, is the world that he appeared to create for us. And that world of Rezwan, that paradise of the unity of mankind, is a paradise that is going to be transformed and such by the appearance of the divine station of the Mashiach Avalier. It is making us humans to understand our fullest capacity. Our fullest capacity was the legacy of Adam. What was the legacy of Adam before he left paradise? He was created of the image of God. So Baha'u'llah says, now that the Adam people, like the people of Adam, forgot the image of God in them, now with my declaration, the garden Rezwan, I'm I'm re-inviting you into that paradise of my presence, because if you are seeing my countenance, you will understand who you are. And this is the meaning of the hadith of Imam Ali: who recognized his own true self has recognized God. So recognizing Baha'u'llah ultimately means becoming like what we humans, with our human limitation, understand of Baha'u'llah. We cannot really understand what Baha'u'llah truly is, because he's the Mashiyat Awaliyah. But what we imagine him to be is not Baha'u'llah, is Hossein Ali Nuri, as an example of who you and me are meant to be. So this is the station of aspiration, the station for which the manifestation came and took 40 years of banishment, imprisonment, sufferings and all that, gave up Mirza Mehdi, his son, as a sacrifice, and put this legacy on the shoulders of Abdul Baha, later Shori Effendi, and the establishment of universal laws of justice, 20,000 martyrs in the time of the Bab, 10,000 again until the time of Abdul Baha. All of that for you and me to try and aspire to become what we are meant to be. And that idea we get by having an idea of who Baha'u'llah is. So what Baha'u'llah is not really Baha'u'llah as the primal will. Is Hossein Ali Nuri as an example of a human being. And this is what you are meant to become. And that's why Abdul Baha is the mirror of Baha'u'llah. He's not the mirror of the Mashiyat Awaliyah. He's the mirror of the ideal, typical reality of Baha'u'llah. Hossein Ali Nuri is actually the shadow of him, is the mirror of him. And in that regard is for us the perfect human being, and also an access for us to become like what we are meant to become. So this is why Baha'u'llah in the Gleanings is revealing in the very first chapter of the Gleanings, we read that far, far from thy glory be what mortal man can affirm of thee or attribute unto thee, or the praise with which he can glorify thee. Whatever duty thou hast prescribed unto thy servants of extolling to the utmost thy majesty and glory is but a token of thy grace unto them, that they may be enabled to ascend unto the station confirmed upon their own inmost being, the station of the knowledge of their own selves. So Baha'u'llah's whole mission is not to recognize Baha'u'llah, which is impossible, but by turning towards Baha'u'llah as an idea of yours, you are meant to turn yourself towards your potential as a divine creature. And now, next to the fact that no religion or ideology is elevating the station of a human being to that level and glorifying it with these terms and words, next to that, for the end of our session, I want to turn our attention to something else as well. So basically, we said in the prophetic cycle, which lasted 6,000 years, and it was starting with Adam historically and ended with Prophet Muhammad, and was reopened into a new cycle with the Bab. The prophets of the past, in their narrations of Islam, it says that in the future, when the promised one comes, a sign of the greatness of his day is that with him, all the prophets of the past will return. They will do a rejat. Yeah, they will come with the promised one and they will reappear. Yeah. So the Bab, for example, in the beginning of the Bayan is calling Mullah Hussein, for example, the return of the Prophet Muhammad. Sometimes in his writings, Qudus is like named the return of the Holy Spirit, or like the return of Christ. So you see, the concept of return is here and there to be found. And also other holy figures are mentioned, are returned in the letters of the living or the early believers and so on. So basically, obviously a manifestation of God on his divine station is beyond any ontological level of Mullah Hussein, or like how much more beyond anything that we are, like, could imagine. So basically, when the Bible or the Quran is speaking about the return of the prophets, it is what the Bab is like conferring upon Mullah Hussein, is the return of the functionality of the Prophet Muhammad, the return of his mission. So this is what Baha'u'llah also confirms in the Surah Wafa. So basically, Mullah Hussein did what Muhammad did and what his mission was. The Prophet Muhammad received his words in a conversation with the angel Gabriel. And Gabriel, no one else was witnessing that. Gabriel was giving his words to Prophet Muhammad and telling him to promulgate his words to mankind. So this is the same thing that happened when the Bab met Mullah Hussein. The Bab now, as the voice of God, is giving revelationary mission to Mullah Hussein, calling him consequently also the Babul Bab, the gate to the gate, like as Muhammad was the gate to the truth. So basically, Mullah Hussein is receiving the words of the Bab and the mission to later promulgate his words to mankind. Yeah? And the same with the other letters of the living. So it is the return of mission, the return of the mission of Muhammad. Muhammad was a prophet because he was glorifying the day of the promised one before the promised one was there. Christ was praising the promised one before the promised one came. They were teaching, they were teachers of the faith of the promised one with the prophecies and the superlative glorification of the promised one they put into their writings. So that mission, now Baha'u'llah says, was given to the believers. The reality of the divinity of the Mashata Avaliya, the primal will, came with Baha'u'llah. In the past, the primal will was delegated to transcendence, and the manifestation said, he is God and I am just the messenger of him. Now Baha'u'llah says, I am God, like brings the divinity into the world of conditions and delegates the station of messengership, prophethood to his believers. The level of the ubudiyat of Mashata Avali, which was the cloak of the prophets of the past, was now given to the believers. This is the reality of the mystery of the Rejat, like the return of the prophets. So they returned, the prophets returned in the believers of this age and the believers of the people of Baha and all the ones who are doing community building and so on, and following the institute process and teaching people the truth, because the functionality and their mandate, this being delegated by God for a mission, that concept was reappearing in them, in the believers who serve the cause of God. So this is why Abdul Baha says, the station that a true believer of Baha'u'llah in this era can reach is the station of a prophet of the Old Testament. This is in Abdul Baha's writings, in the original, and then translated and narrated by Shori Effendi in World Order of Baha'u'llah, where he is summarizing the very huge and tremendously heavy statements of Abdul Baha about the greatness of this day. So he says the station of a true believer is the return of the prophets of the Old Testament. Now, bear with me, friends. This is why Baha'u'llah in the hidden words is saying, for example, O Son of Spirit, O Son of Man, O Son of Light. You see, all these names, these titles, are actually, for example, the title, O Friend, yeah, O Companion. These are titles in the past theological writings of the prophets of the past. For example, O Friend. When Baha'u'llah says, O Friend, this is huge. In the past religions, in the Bible or in the Quran, for example, the believers were like always rebuked for their sin, for not listening to the ordeals of God, and the prophet had to like intervene. Moses had to pray to God, please don't punish them and so on. Prophet Muhammad has to do that for the Muslims. Yeah, but never the believers in a religion were called the friends of God or something like that. Yeah, the sons of light or something like that. The sons of spirit. So in this dispensation, this happens. And especially the name, O Friend, is very important here. Because in the Bible, there's like also in the Quran, the story that Abraham, like the Sodom and Gomorrah thing, where God wants to destroy the cities and so on. And then Abraham says, like, intervenes for mankind to God and says, like, can you not, like, maybe not destroy the cities and so on if I, for example, find 20 righteous people and so on. And so God says, if you find 20 good people, because like basically this place is rotten. People here are completely off in every sense, have to be destroyed. So he says, like, if you find 20 righteous people, it shall be okay. And Abraham can't find 20, and he says, like, to God, what about if I find 10? 10 is also acceptable. Can't find 10. Says to God, what if I find 5? God says, find 5 righteous people, and the whole city should be spared. Abraham can't even find 1. Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed, and God calls Abraham his only friend. Yeah, Khalilullah, which is actually basically goes back to the Hebrew tradition, that he was a friend of God. So now Baha'u'llah says, what Abraham was for God once, or also Habibullah was also a title of Muhammad, the companion of God, the dear one to God, the friend of God. This title now Baha'u'llah gives every one of his believers reading the hidden words, and is saying like, this is the station of mankind in this age, the friend of God, companion of God. So basically, also the Son of Spirit. The Son of Spirit was a title of Christ. Yeah, Ruhollah. The Son of Man was really a messianic title of the promised one from the Torah when Jesus should have appeared with that title and that designation. So you see, all that, what was like bestowed upon the prophets of the past, is now given graciously by Baha'u'llah, graciously to his believers who raise to serve his cause. And to serve his cause means what? To be the reason for the inspiration of others. And he says, no deed of worship is greater than be the cause for other people's view on truth, enlightening the eyes of someone who's blind for the truth and giving birth to a new consciousness. This is the greatest and most meritorious deed that exists. To be the cause for someone else's spiritual progress. So this is the greatest of all services. This is actually what Abdul Baha calls, that's why he calls teaching the faith the cornerstone of the cause of God in his testament. And now basically, when we said God appeared, and this is not for Baha'u'llah to say to us who he is, but it is like actually to make clear how great our station can be, basically proclaiming his faith and teaching his cause is the repetition and the return of all the deeds that the prophets of the past did, and actually the only way for us to unlock our true potential and to become what the past religions describe as station of prophethood, which is the highest station that human can reach, and it is the highest station of service. It is like absolute service towards the divine threshold. It means like being an absolute mouthpiece for the divine reality. It means like you're so free of every attachment that you, like a prophet, are the absolute mouthpiece for the words of Baha'u'llah that you are carrying into mankind, into the consciousness of your fellow brothers and sisters in society. And that's the only way for us to attain what we are meant to do and to safeguard the station that Baha'u'llah, with his huge blessings, put on our shoulders, the crown with which he glorified us, the crown that he put on our heads. And this is actually basically also the true meaning of that longing and prayer of Abdul Baha when he's explaining why he prefers amongst all that exalted titles that Baha'u'llah bestowed upon him, only and solely Abdul Baha being the servant of the glory of God. And in that regard, I'm thanking you all for your attention today. Very, very thankful to Mr. Kamal Abadia and Edalation, my two beloved brothers in spirit, for having given me the chance to speak about this very, very important topic, about the greatness of this day. Hopefully, it could have been some invitation for all of us to dive deeper into that also in our personal lives, and hopefully it will bring fruit in regard and in sense of more teaching the faith, more aspiration, ambition to make other people get familiar with Baha'u'llah and this cause. Thank you very much to everybody. And looking very forward to see you again at the next session.
Thank you so much, Shahnam Jan. It was great as always. We appreciate all your efforts and your time spent in preparing for this event, and also for the time that you're giving to share all your wisdom with us. So friends, before we get into the question and answer session, let's have a musical video, and then we'll get back to the session.
人类一起面对，为理想欢呼耶！
Okay, friends, thank you everyone for attending. Now we will go into the questions and answers session. So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. Mateen, yes, please go ahead.
Hi, hello, hi Shahnam and everyone else. I had a question, and it may be in relation to the topic and maybe a little bit quite different, but um, there's this understanding that every manifestation of God, every dispensation that comes in has sort of, it takes some time for the revelation of that manifestation of God to sort of affect the people of the world, affect the people of the nation. And when I've done research, I've seen that, and I don't know if this is 100% true, and you can tell me if I'm not correct or not. But every dispensation sort of takes three to 400 years for people to sort of come to the faith. If you look at Christian, if you look at Christ during the Roman Empire, this massive empire, it took quite some time for that empire not only to fall, but for that empire to become Christian. And that's why I look at the Baha'i faith in Iran, and that it's been so long that it has these persecutions and oppressions of the people have occurred. Do you have an estimation based on your you know study of history and of religions, that how much long it will take for, not to say the government, I don't want to say that will be fallen, the sort of the oppressive government, but that the world, the way that Baha'u'llah says and Abdul Baha says and Shoghi Effendi says, that Persia, Iran will be the country of enlightenment and of beauty and of spiritual degrees and all these things. Do you have an idea of when that could happen based on previous dispensations?
First of all, Alaba, Martin, nice to see you again. And thank you very much for your very interesting elaboration. So basically, I mean, there are like different hints in the writings towards like things like when the Baha'i faith will like get more known and recognized and all of that and so on. And also about Iran, there are like passages that like are hinting to specific events, progresses that need to take place and so on. But the actually the most useful answer for us is always when something like that. Now you asked about Iran. Somebody else could also ask that when will the old world order completely be overwritten by the new world or whatever. Everything that is like in regard of the future, always like basically what Shuri Effendi or the Universal Laws of Justice in regard of that says, that it is in the end dependent on also our aspiration to bring forth the cause of God and to establish the whole Baha'i thinking by that community building process and so on. So as easy as that sounds, and as maybe unsatisfying as it might sound for an answer on the question about the future, this is the reality. So basically, Baha'u'llah himself is not giving specific dates as in the Bible and the Quran, because we are in the age of maturity, because future is now written by you and me, because future is written by the decisions that we make daily in regard of establishing whatever the universal laws of justice in regard of guidance is giving us as tools to the hand. And if we look into the messages of the last years and so on, obviously we see that we are a threshold, right? I want to say it very cautiously, but we are at a threshold to many, many changes, Martin. That's like a very apparent in the messages of the universal laws of justice. Also, not just the Resma messages, but the ones also to specific communities, nations, believers in specific places and so on. So, yeah, that's one thing. But another thing that we have to keep in mind here is also like how Shor Effendi is describing it. And he's like speaking about an integrative line, a disintegrative line. Now you asked about Iran, he's speaking about the whole world, but you can use that as a scheme for as a model for every other thing about community growth and old world order and so such stuff as well. He says like there's an integrative line which is the endeavors of the Baha'i friends. There's a disintegrative line that is like everything that is happening daily by the old thinking, by the old culture, by the old institutions, by the people being without orientation, by calamities, challenges that will come on earth and all that because we are as humanity made wrong choices and so on. And this is the crumbling of the old world order. The integrative line is establishing the foundation of the new world order. And there's a middle line between that. So that plays also a role, Martin. As much as you and me are also doing community building process, things have to happen in a broader scale in the world by people who are not Baha'i, but are doing what Baha'u'llah's time, spirit of time, his zeitgeist is, which will make the Baha'i faith or the goal of Baha'u'llah successful on earth, victorious in the long run. So basically, in institutions, in places, in niches where we have no access to. So this is another part of it, and that's why we speak about the concept of co-workers and co-workership and so on. So it is obviously a process. I think we are, according to what the Universal Laws of Justice is saying, like very close to a very specific time in history, especially as we hit 2021. You knew there was always like a huge prophecy about that a lot in the world will change by then. And we see like a lot of the world changed politically, is still in the change. Calamities came that we before that thought like our generation will never witness that kind of stuff and so on. Many things are happening. Obviously, I don't have to name all of them like in detail, but things are happening in the Baha'i world, especially also in the non-Baha'i world since 2021. And it started earlier, 2013, when the house of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad was destroyed, Martin. There is a prophecy of Baha'u'llah in the Gleanings. I think like it's number 36, 37, 38, something like that, where Baha'u'llah speaks about his house in Baghdad. And it says like that when that the house will be destroyed in future by the hands of the enemies. And when that happens, the day of lamentation, the day of lamentation is close at hand. And since then, so many things happened that we like maybe are underestimating in a historical retrospectival view, but they were huge actually in regard of geopolitical developments and so on. So we are in a special time, in a very specific time. That's also why the messages of the Universal Laws of Justice and the growth of the faith is now like so differently guided and directed as ever before. And in the end, as an answer to what you're asking, Shor Effendi is naming some stations. He says some stages that have to happen where the Baha'i faith has to go through until bigger things that we like know are promised in our writings are going to happen. And in that regard, he says, like, for example, that the Baha'i faith has to go through obscurity, as first of all, persecution, obscurity, like that it's not really known, and it will pass that and will be then recognized. And the recognition, for example, came in Germany when the Baha'i faith got a status that only and solely the Jewish community and the Christian community has in Germany, for example, legally, So this kind of stuff happens. Then in Canada, we had things that happened. And here and then you see like some places of the world still persecution is Iran, some minor places still obscurity. But like there where the pioneers, national pioneers are sent by the Universal Laws of Justice, there was this Baltic initiative, they were still in obscurity, but the generality of the faith is beyond that station. It's close to the stage of recognition, and then comes obviously also phases like being like co-equal to the other religions and every other civil aspect and so on. And then comes when the Baha'i faith becomes a state religion, then becomes a Baha'i super state and all of that. So we are far from there, but still we are like beyond obscurity mostly. So the Universal Laws of Justice a few years ago was actually before 2021, where they actually said that we are like now hitting a new phase in that very phases that the progress of the faith has to pass until it will establish itself worldwide and so on. Then we have also other prophecies of Baha'u'llah in a tablet to Janab Vargha, where he's like speaking about different things that happen in the world before the Baha'i faith is as such recognized. yeah, if that's interesting, there can be sessions about that also in future at one time. But I mean, like, yeah, in the end, all of that, having said all of that, in the end, it depends also on the action of the friends and the willingness and consciousness of the human beings who act as co-workers of our goal for mankind.
Great. Thank you so much. Empire Habibu, please unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question. I want to know when we connect someone with the Baha'i faith. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask, when we connect someone with the Baha'i faith, we can say that he was like asleep and then he's awakening. Can you also say that we are recreating him?
Hey, Habibu, very nice to see you again after last session, and your questions were obviously all very inspiring. And this one is also very interesting. I like it very much. So basically, yeah, in the prayers about teaching and service to the cause, you see there many times terms like that God enable me to be a breath of life for that, for the one who hears your message or so on, for the one that we are teaching. Let us like make this mold, this molded bones to arise again. Let us be, a vital power to them. Let us resurrect them. All this kind of terminology is in the Baha'i writing. So basically, when somebody is guiding somebody to the faith, also the Bab said that before, it is actually like the creation of Adam. So you are creating somebody with your understanding and capacity according to the image of what you are. Basically, like that's the Adam thing, and then the spirit of faith, like the spirit of God that is putting into that mold is actually the faith, and that has to then to grow. Then actually there's a process of making that person self-sustained, independent, and to empower him to feel the Baha'i faith from in a most straightforward hand in the most straightforward way, firsthand by himself and so on. So, but yeah, you're right. We are like actually bringing the judgment day, the resurrection for all the people who are bereft of the Baha'i, understanding the Baha'i faith and hearing from the message of Baha'u'llah and being revived spiritually again. Yeah, that's actually that process, what you just said.
Great, thank you. By the way, friends, I have put some notes in the chat. The first one is about the recordings of these sessions with our dear friend, Mr. Shahnam. These are all kept in a Telegram channel, and it's called Saturday with Shahnam. So we have the link down here. You can copy and get into the Telegram channel and watch or copy whatever videos and information that's in there, so you can have access to those. And also, if you are not part of our English session group, it's called Mystic Nightingale group. If you are not part of it and you would like to receive information and Zoom information and other Baha'i information, you can send me your complete name and email address, and I will gladly add you to our group. Zohra Khanum, please unmute yourself. Go ahead and ask your question.
Unmute. Okay. Mikasa, I want to ask about we are coming before in this world. We've been in the world of Mashiach. Is it possible a little bit explain about this word Mashiach? I don't know English name.
First of all, Zohra Khanum, thank you very much for your question. Thank you very much for your time having been with us tonight. That, what you were just asking, actually, we talked about that last time, 2 weeks ago, when we talked about the kingdom of names and attributes, which is the world by which we are. It's like the furthest point of what we can understand of the Mashiach, which is qualities and names, and they are ultimately also the absolute determination of ours, what we are meant to become. We talked about it a little bit more in detail last time. That's why I would maybe suggest or recommend maybe to get somehow the link also from last time. But yeah, basically we as human beings, we are always Just to make it very short, just with one or two sentences, we are basically always in the next world, in the realm of like the Malakuta Asma, or as you said, like in the realm of Mashiach, like because it's then beyond this world of conditions. And we are there as a potential. The potential reality of ours is something, and our biographical reality in this world is something else. We are potentially, as we are as a potential already in the other world and never disconnected from there. But our mission in this world is to shape our reality in a form that we become what we are potentially meant to be. But we are never away from the other world. We are already in the other world in a spiritual concept already. And our senses and our perception of the material reality is preventing us to see that other realm. But basically, that other realm is part of this world by being another dimension in this world, a dimension that is beyond the perception of our senses. So, yeah, more about that. I think, yeah, I have to suggest the session from last time. We talked about it very, very much in detail.
Thank you.
Yeah, most welcome.
Thank you. Empire Habibu, please unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Go
Okay.
ahead, please
Thank
ask your
you.
question.
Yeah, thank you. I just another question came in my head, and so how can we connect this with the Badi calendar, which has and names of God on the days of the day and the months, as we know. So how do we connect this by recreating ourselves?
Yeah, so basically, that's actually a very good question. There are a lot of explanations about that from the Bab himself, who also like established the Badi calendar. Basically, the Bab, by creating a new calendar, this has a lot of layers, But just to speak about it like shortly, the new calendar is actually creating a new understanding of time and space. Time and space in the writings of the Bab are put under a process of divinization. Everything in the writings of Baha'u'llah and the Bab is addressed with divine attributes to make for us clear once that this is the day of God, means it is every day in the calendar and every like different things. He also recalls professions. He gives to jobs different names. To believers who used to have specific culturally traded names, he gives like divine attributes as names. In the conference of Badash, Baha'u'llah is renaming the believers with divine names and so on, as a new baptization or something like that. New identity is born. But basically, the Bab is doing that with the divinization of time and space to show like that God appeared, and everything in time and space should be a witness or like a testimony, a sign, a hint to what, or a remembrance that a testimony that God appeared in this age on earth. Second, it is for you and me to strive towards divinity. That's also why he divinized everything in time and space, made everything sound like a divine name, a divine quality, look like a divine quality. So basically, the calendar is like is built upon the number 361, which is the numerical value for Kol Shai, all things. So it means all things in this world of being testified that God appeared and partook on the divine reality, and that means that you and me in this era have to strive to become like what you and me project on the divine. That is our mission, to turn ourselves to that. That's why all things in the world of being are testifying to the divinity that manifested itself in this age by Bab and Baha'u'llah, and consecutively is the station that you and me should relatively reach. So yeah, the Paddy calendar has a lot to do with everything we said, with the day of God. The new calendar testifies that the whole new era of thinking appeared. All religions have an own calendar, which is signifying one phase or one day in the divine plan. And of course, the Baha'i faith has an independent calendar again. But it also is important because, like, the Baha'i calendar is signifying, which starts with Nowruz and so on, with symbolically nature's revived and so on. It is a signal for Baha'u'llah as the appearance of God, making bringing the judgment day, the day where everything is made new again, the day where everything becomes something new, and everything in the past is, in the most literal sense, the past. The calendars, which is a sign for measuring time, of the Baha'i faith itself says the past time measures are the past, and now we are in the present and towards the future of a new era of human development. A lot of things of the Badi calendar, why Nowruz and everything, a lot of that has to do with the day of God and the concept that in this era on time, the divine Godhood himself appeared on earth.
Great, thank you. Samuel, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Go ahead.
Aloha to everyone and to my brother Shahnam. I hope you're all doing well. And my question was that since we already know that in the Baha'i faith we're so much more involved than other faiths, not to put down obviously the other faiths and the other religions, but why don't we advertise or try to convert is a bad word, but if you know what I mean, we normally don't advertise to convert people into the faith. We usually only say, yeah, let's bring them to peace and etc. But we don't want them to become, or our primary goal isn't to make them a Baha'i. It's just to make them bring them to peace and create unity. Why are we not doing that? Why are we not trying to convert them if we're the primal
Yeah.
example of?
First of all, thank you very much for having attended our session tonight, Samuel. Just another thing for Habibu's question. When I said time and space is put into and under divinization, I spoke about the calendar. I just wanted to mention Habibu also places, cities, villages. The Bab and Baha'u'llah gave other names by choice. Sometimes just named them with a letter or something, and the letter has then a lot of space for interpretation because of many qualities, divine qualities that start with the letter and so on. So that's why it's a time and space, yeah? But now to the question of Samuel, it depends on the community in which we are living and how the people are entertaining conversations about teaching the faith and how they're planning the teaching projects and so on. But to make it, to keep it 100 with you, it is like basically our goal is not to increase numbers of people just on paper. That obviously not. Our goal now is to make everybody fulfill the purpose for which he was created. And that is only possible by turning towards Baha'u'llah. So obviously the goal is to make people to take all the veils by arguments for the truth, by service to them and the community and whatever. The goal is to rend asunder the veils for somebody to directly see from countenance to countenance the countenance of God, what we talked about today, and which ultimately means somebody spiritually turning towards Baha'u'llah. So obviously that is the goal. Obviously that is the testimony of the first paragraph in the Kitab al-Aqdas. Also there's a testimony of Baha'u'llah in the Kitab al-Aqdas where it says whoever loves me has everything and who's bereft of my love has nothing. Where he says in the tablet to Queen Victoria where he says or in the tablet of Malik Sahib where he says whoever lives at this day shall never die, but who's dead on this day shall never live. So basically, of course, the goal is this. Of course, the whole aim of us is to make people connected to the purpose of their life. The purpose of their life is not just by our material service projects to them and so on to just have a good time that very moment and that's it. Basically, all we do is means to a higher purpose, and that higher purpose is for that person to spiritually get connected to the source of his existence, which is Baha'u'llah. Look at this, from this perspective. Obviously, we talked about the greatness of this day. If anything else except the absolute focus of ours to be and the highest priority for somebody to find way to Baha'u'llah by arguments, by whatever, devotion meetings, other core activities, whatever we do. But if something else, then making them close to Baha'u'llah and believe in him wholeheartedly, if anything other than this is our motive, then we are lost, Samuel. Obviously, this is everything. That's the whole cornerstone of our Baha'i identity, is you are awakened, you are privileged to know Baha'u'llah, and your duty is to let others partake on that privilege. It is as if you have a remedy, and we would keep that for ourselves, just for any reason possible. So if we know that this is the remedy, how selfish would it be if the rest of the world, because of this and that reasons, would not be partaking on the treasure I found. So obviously, this is the main thing. The main thing is, it depends, as I said, to the individual, to the community culture, how we do that and how directly and so on. But I actually, after 200 years since the birth of Baha'u'llah, on earth, a little longer than 200 years. I think we should like slowly, slowly really start to name the name of Baha'u'llah very directly. Shouldn't like really always just carefully look for very, very cautious moments to like not cause any misunderstanding and so on, and just like speak generally about life, society, and the world affairs. I think the time really came for us also to offer what we have as the solution of the problems of today by naming the solution. Yeah, and that's actually up to the bravery and courage of the individual, of him, how much he caught fire, how much he feels confident in speaking about the faith. But this is something for which we have the institute process to get the tools and the confidence, the empowerment to do so, to be better tools and instruments to the service of Baha'u'llah. In the end, obviously it has to be carried on also with the attitude of prayer, praying to Baha'u'llah to enlighten me, inspire me with what I need to say for the people to say what the people need to hear to get closer to you. But in the end, Samuel, there is no compromise with that. Our goal is ultimately to make people know Baha'u'llah, and this is the purpose of our life. And it goes as far as the Bab says in the Kitab al-Bayan, if you even guide one soul to the presence of whom God will make manifest, your reward for that will eternally be paradise upon paradise. As long as you and that soul are under the shadow of whom God will make manifest, you and that person who was guided by you will always be the center of divine blessings in all the worlds to come for all eternity. Obviously, this is our goal. And also, Abdul Baha says it like that. He says, like, basically in a tablet to the believers in America, he said once, yeah, basically, this is like just a framework for thinking, but he says, like, you should like teach the faith of Baha'u'llah every day, and at least once a year guide a soul to the recognition of Baha'u'llah. Then, for example, Mr. Nakhchavani used to say that when he was 15 he became Baha'i, and at that time when he gave us a talk back then in a youth conference, he was like 90 years old. He said, like, 75 years I was a Baha'i. And I don't know how you feel, but I am afraid of a day where I have to stand in the presence of Baha'u'llah or Abdul Baha, and he asks me, where are the 75 souls that you brought to the cause of God? Show me, Ali. And then he always said like this, can Ali Nakhchavani then say, I brought 75 souls to the cause of God, or no? Only Baha'u'llah knows. But yeah, I mean, like, basically this is how people like him really took that guidance of Abdul Baha and the obligation of teaching the faith seriously. This is not a plaything to make the plaything of our interpretation. Teaching the faith, okay, maybe only by example, maybe, okay, I just say once, hi, what do you think about the situation of the world? Okay, we had a meaningful conversation because we both agreed the world is not good. This is not enough, Samuel. Obviously, teaching has to go deeper. You have to put your hand like a physician on that very spot where that, in the consciousness of that person, that veil is put, where that spiritual challenge, sickness, if you want to say it like that, is put, and then you have to diagnose that and find with your arguments a solution for that person to transform in his consciousness, to get closer or receptive for the cause of the blessed beauty. Halat, if I even talk about this until 4 weeks, it's like straight, it's not enough. But actually, I hope you got an idea how serious actually teaching the faith is as a privilege and as an obligation.
Yes. Thank you so much. Dear friends, our session is over. We'd like to keep it up to maximum 2 hours, and it's 1 p.m. California time. Thank you everyone for attending. If I understand you, Shahnam John, we're not going to have a session next 2 weeks from now, which is June 14th. Is that correct?
Yeah, with the permission of the friends, we will have a little summer break in June, and we will return again. Like I have to like see the calendar at the end.
So 4 weeks from today is the 28th of June.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
I will. Is it okay if I double check and tell you again, like
Sure.
as soon as possible, 28th or the first weekend then in July? But I will get back to you, friends.
Definitely, no problem. So please be on the lookout for the announcement of the next session. But definitely, we won't have any session 2 weeks from today, which is June 14th. And just be on the lookout for the announcement for the next session, upcoming session. And Sonia Khanum, our time is up. Do you have any questions, or you just want to ask about? Okay, Tala Khanam, Sona Khanam, we don't have time for any more questions. If you have any questions, please keep them for the next time around. So because our time is up, but if you want something quick to know about just the general class, please go ahead.
Just a request. You mentioned about the reality, and that is clear for us as a Baha'i. Reality and truth is one. I would like to hear from you how we are going to convey the non-Baha'is about this, because the reality and truth for them has two different things.
Okay, friends, Sona Khanam, can you please keep this question for the next session? Because
Yes,
there's
that's
another session.
what I meant. I requested for next time not to
Sure,
be forgotten.
sure,
It's very important matter. Thanks.
sure. Yes, please attend our next session and please ask your question. So you will be the first one to be answered. And Tala Khanam, how about you?
لابها
Allah.
just من میخواستم فقط از شهنام جون تشکر کنم last week
Can you please speak in English because this is an English session?
ببخشید I'm so sorry
No problem.
I just want to say thank you to Shahnam for last session. I have a question and I contact and he answered me very beautifully, and thank you. Just want to say thank you. That's all.
Okay, sure, no problem. Okay, friends, thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you in our next session. We'll announce it whenever it comes up.